Hello everyone, it's the introverted astrologer here. A big welcome to the new subscribers. Thank you. I hope I can continue bringing you interesting but impartial content. And today I'm having an impartial look at the chart of Kamala Harris. This lady is fascinating material from an astrological point of view because of her ascendant. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Another thing about Kamala is that she doesn't seem to get very much press attention. And on looking at her chart, we can see that she has actually been forging ahead under some rather difficult, foggy astrological weather. We also know that Joe Biden has much of his difficulties in the first part of this year. There are some stressful transits that will be unfolding for him. And so from this perspective, it would be nice to know how Kamala Harris will be placed in the event that any of Joe Biden's issues end up with him needing to take a bit of a back seat for a while. So we'll have a look at Kamala's natal chart now, and then we'll move on to her transits. We're taking a quick look at Kamala's natal chart, and perhaps you'll see what I mean about her ascendant here. She has her north node tightly conjunct that ascendant. The part of fortune tightly opposes it on the descendant. I'll keep this interesting ascendant in mind because we'll come back to it in a couple of minutes when we look at what was happening when Kamala and Joe first won a Democrat victory back in 2020. Now, if we weigh up Kamala's chart, we have a lot of fixed and cardinal positions. If you were including the outer planets, her overall signature is actually Taurus. But the interconnectedness between all these planets is quite riveting. Many of her angles and planets sextile each other, star-shaped formation. If you go a little wider on your orbs with the sextile between the Mars and her Sun, then she has a Star of David formation. It stretches across many fire and air placements. And so I would suspect this would be a person who would have many opportunities come to them during life. We also have a mystic rectangle, and that Mars is in quite a tense T-square. Because of the node on the ascendant, we know that self-development, forward advancement, going with the life path, following opportunities that arise, is critical for this person. There is clear destiny and advancement here. We have abundant energy, a drive to succeed, and we are a leader, not a follower. The Sun-Mercury conjunction could indicate somebody who is quite opinionated, makes decisions quickly, and is very invested in those decisions. So self-criticism or objectivity could be more difficult. We can take on great responsibility, work slowly and steadily towards positions where we will be able to step up and take weight on our shoulders. That close trine between the Sun and Saturn on the midheaven can show this capacity to take big responsibilities. And the Sun, Moon and Mars are joining in together to set up that dynamic tension and assist her in moving towards this goal. We have the squares and the oppositions necessary to create that inner dynamic, the tension, the drive to overcome and work towards Saturn's goals. But there will be problems within this person's behaviours potentially, because there's also quite a self-orientated feeling about this chart. We have that moon in Aries, and Aries can be forthright, dynamic, action-orientated, but its opposition to the Sun and Mercury is creating a tension between ego and emotions, between intellect and emotions. And so this person may be a little over-attached to their own decisions, and they will need to guard against impulsivity and not backing down even when we're wrong. Thought processes and communications are extremely important because we have a Gemini ascendant, and that Mercury is in Scorpio, which is never superficial. We have an abundance of energy, an Aries moon trining that Mars. This is a go-getter, very dynamic. The square between Mars and Neptune reinforces a couple of other signs I've seen, that perhaps this person would have some difficulty with an honest and realistic self-appraisal. Learning how to plan and organise and assert oneself could be something that this person would struggle with. Taking responsibility for actions could also be problematic. And this is in the third house of communication, data, the rational mind, our intellect. Kamala has had a bit of a learning curve here. Top 5 things I would say about this chart. Driven towards destiny. Heavy emphasis on own goals. Built for responsibility. Communication is paramount. And with Uranus, Pluto, Venus in her 4th house and opposing that Chiron in the 10th. We probably have great charisma. We're passionate. We hate injustice. And it could be part of our public role that we are able to address hurts caused through injustice. Now we're going to have a look at the fascinating things that happened in Kamala's chart at the time of the election back in 2020. The astrology of Kamala's progressions and solar arcs in November 2020 are stunning. Her progressed sun is actually moving to conjunct her descendant. That part of fortune is included. It's conjuncting her south node. Just a few months earlier, the sun would have perfected its aspect to Jupiter, in that the progressed sun was inconjunct or quincunx Jupiter, and her progressed midheaven, now at the position of 1 degree and 47 of Taurus, has been opposing her chart ruler Mercury. So we know something fundamental is happening career-wise, and that the need for communication will be intense. Progressed Mars is still within a degree or so orb of a conjunction to that natal Venus. And this is significant because we have another aspect involving that Mars. And this is because her solar arc north node is conjuncting Mars. Mars is her moon ruler. It's also in her 3rd house of communication, of asserting herself and getting what she wants through the power of speech and interchange with other people. And there's further emphasis on that unusual ascendant because solar arc moon is conjuncting it at this time too. If we'd only been looking at transits for Kamala in 2020, we would have been very wary of transiting Neptune moving through her 10th house. It had been opposing her Venus, and we might have been anticipating some disappointment in relationships, broken dreams, a shattering of illusions. Neptune had actually stationed direct at around 18 degrees of Pisces later in November 2020. But if we looked at Kamala's natal chart, we would see that Venus and Neptune are in a helpful sextile with each other. And so the transit was probably not as difficult as it could have been in somebody else's chart. Now we're going to move forward and have a look at Kamala's transits and progressions for 2024. Let's see if they're as striking and dramatic as what we have seen here. If we look first to her ruling planet, Mercury, by progression, it is moving retrograde over her descendant. And by so doing, of course, it will conjunct that part of fortune and the south node. So we do need to keep our eyes open. There is, of course, that emphasis on communication, but could we also anticipate some further developments in line with that destined path? And we can also see that that progressed sun is nearing a perfect sextile with her natal Saturn up there on her midheaven. We're just a few minutes away of this being exact, and this would have been something that would be drawing closer and closer as 2024 unfolds. There is a natal trine between her Sun and Saturn, and quite a close one at that. So the fact that this sextile is perfecting is very important. Are we seeing Kamala continue to make steady, sustained progress towards her career goals? That progressed sun is still, strictly speaking, within orb of a trine to her natal moon, but it is separating further and further as we reach the end of November 2024. We do have a couple of aspects by solar arc, although these may not be related to her career, and that is the fact that her natal Uranus and Pluto are within a couple of degrees of each other in her natal chart. And as they have been advanced by solar arc methods, they now reach a point where they are conjuncting that natal vertex. Let's move on and have a look at the transits of 2024 for Kamala, because these do bring some tension. Before we start discussing Kamala's transits during 2024, it would only be fair to explain that Kamala has actually experienced some very difficult and lengthy transits during her term as Vice President. I notice that there is a bit of a black hole in media coverage of Kamala during her term. There has been some coverage of staff problems, but not very much else. Now, one of the transits that she's been undergoing, and this will have been difficult, is that Pluto has been squaring her Sun-Moon opposition. And this will have been unfolding over at least a couple of years. And that is stressful. There'll be a power dynamic involved. Control issues and vulnerability will have been playing out too. Not the sort of transits one would hope for during a first term at being Vice President. And to make matters worse, transiting Neptune has been squaring her ascendant also for at least the last couple of years. In fact, that won't have moved away until the December that has just gone in 2023. So we won't have seen the best of Kamala or her full potential, I don't believe. And 2024 is bringing fresh tests for her. One of them is that Pluto has now moved into Aquarius. It's going to be squaring that Mercury of hers. So we're going to see increasing emphasis on her mental skills, her communications. As Pluto applies closer, will we see signs of strain and stress? We could literally be using that Pluto transit to try to control, shape and manipulate our oratory and communication with the population. Nonetheless, we would expect intense pressure and stress through this. But transiting Saturn has really caught my eye because it will be moving through Kamala's 10th house, her 10th house of career, and it will be conjuncting that natal Chiron and opposing Venus, Pluto and Uranus in a lengthy ongoing transit that starts in spring of 2024. Now, spring of 2024 is significant for a few reasons. We know Joe Biden will be starting a couple of very intense transits from Uranus to his Sun, from Pluto to his Moon, and these begin during spring of 2024. With Saturn transiting through Kamala's 10th house, will we be seeing an intense pressure being placed on her, potentially change, a need to reorient, transform in some way, and something that places a heavy burden. Life could feel like all work and no play. But at the same time, transiting Uranus will conjunct her Jupiter, which is one of her midheaven rulers. And again, this will be in spring, in April. Could this bring surprises or unexpected developments in her career? So the whole first 6 months of 2024 is going to possibly be unusual, and I'll have to cover this in a separate video. If we move forward to November 2024, you can see that transiting Saturn has gone retrograde, and so is not clouding the picture for Kamala at the moment. Jupiter is in the area of her ascendant, but it never actually quite makes that conjunction. It has been in sextile to her Mars, and this is still nearby on the 5th of November, but we'd really need something stronger. Mars's current position neither hinders nor helps, although we will look at Mars closer in her solar returns. And transiting Venus is very near her descendant, which is mildly helpful. The Sun is sextile to Uranus. Again, it's not an aspect which will hurt, and it's not harmful. The transits on the day are not strikingly helpful, neither are they going to do her any harm. It's the progressions and solar arcs that really are more important for us to make a decision. As it stands, I don't see Kamala making great falls. The indication is more of ongoing and steady progress. But let's have a look and see what the solar returns tell us. And so here we can see Kamala's solar return beginning in October of 2024. The standalone version of the solar return is on our left, and the chart on the right has her inner birth chart with the solar return planets around the outside. Let's start with the standalone version on the left. This is a picture of the skies at the exact minute that her Sun returned to its natal position in October 2024. And my goodness, that is a Sun taking some hits. It's in a cardinal grand cross. There's a finger of God formation with those inconjuncts to Neptune and Uranus, and it all looks very stressful. But we'll break it down by putting it into context alongside her birth chart. This presents a different picture. Now, part of that grand cross involves Pluto and Mars opposing each other. To put this into context, Mars is moving through Cancer at this time, but it's slowing down, and it moves through into Leo, but doesn't get very far at all when it turns retrograde and advances back, or appears to do so at any rate. And in this retrograde motion, it will return through a big chunk of Cancer, and it will again oppose that Pluto and makes its third opposition to Pluto as it finally moves back into Leo and exits its retrograde shadow. This whole process will not have completed playing out until spring of 2024. But that Pluto-Mars dynamic, this intense energy and drive, force, aggression, sheer ruthlessness and determination is appearing in Kamala's solar return and is showing how her solar energy will be expressed over the coming 12 months. But in all the fury of all those red lines, we can also draw out a trine between Venus, Mars and Neptune, a grand trine, and a trine between the Sun and Jupiter. Let's make a note of the fact that Capricorn is on the ascendant of this solar return. So career is probably very important here, and that the solar return chart ruler will therefore be that Saturn in the second house, and possibly the third if we were using whole sign houses. It has a wide square to Jupiter, and it's more closely squaring that Geminian moon. That moon shows the emphasis on mental acuity, on reasoning, verbal skills, communication and thought processes. And it has quite a lonely feel to it as well, because it is squared quite closely by Saturn. Selfhood would be the key word springing to mind here. Let's see how this plays out against her natal chart though. The solar return ascendant falls quite near her 8th house. And that solar return chart ruler, Saturn, conjuncts her Chiron in the 10th and opposes Uranus, potentially emphasising sudden changes. But it isn't in stressful angle to the ascendant and does very little damage to her other natal planets. Solar return Jupiter is near the ascendant and sextile to her Mars. This solar return covers a period of 12 months, of course, and so it takes us up to October of 2025. There are some stresses in this chart that are going to play out over this time. Things that are catching my attention include the fact that Uranus in the solar return is conjuncting that natal Jupiter. So breakthroughs, opportunities, good luck are possible, but at the same time Uranus is squaring her natal Saturn on her midheaven. So we have change and breakdown potentially of an existing job structure. And that same Uranus is also squaring her natal Mars. If we look at the solar return moon in her 12th house at around 13 degrees of Gemini, we can see that it squares her natal Uranus. So there's a great deal of unsettlement here, perhaps shocks or not feeling at ease. And it also squares Chiron, indicating perhaps hurts or oversensitivity. Granted, the solar return midheaven is not too far away from her natal Mercury, but on balance this is such a mixed picture. I would find it very difficult to say one way or the other how November will play out for Kamala. We mustn't forget those reassuring aspects in her progressions of that progressed Sun in close sextile to her natal Saturn and of her ruling planet conjoining the descendant. And of course we also need to remember that this election may not be straightforward. So we have some bumpy times ahead, and I also know that the last part of 2024, the last couple of months, has some stressful planetary activity in it, and I'll address this in a forthcoming video. But the very next video I do, I'm going to have a recap on RFK Jr.'s chart with a fresh birth time. I'm going to give a go to the afternoon birth time that I found online. We'll see if that shows us a bit more about how he will fare in the forthcoming election. And until then, do take very good care of yourselves, and God bless you and your families.